First of all, thanks for coming out. And earlier I gave some just quick remarks, but I want to say again that I could not start this evening without acknowledging, especially this week, our veterans. And also, yeah, absolutely. That's who ships are for. And also the U.S. Marine Corps. My father was a Marine, so I have a special place in my heart for those. So absolutely. As you can see from the pictures, there's an awful lot of work that goes into building at Newport News Shipbuilding. But what I want to talk about is the people inside the yard. And I want to tell you their stories, because that's what this is really all about, is sort of talking about stories, about the shipbuilders themselves. And I have to tell you, I want to thank you for coming out tonight, but I think the one person who probably would thank you more than me would be my wife out there, who has heard these stories over and over and over again. And I asked her to kind of read through the book for one last time. She's like, I've been hearing this for 30 years now. Because that's all, I started coming down here when we first got married more than 30 years ago. And since then, I want to know what went on inside that shipyard and want to know about their stories. And so it's been a journey, quite honestly, about that. And that's what really this is. I mean, we authors are we're storytellers. We go on journeys, we come back to tell you about our journeys. And that's what I want to do tonight, is tell you about this journey inside the shipyard. It's a different world. And the song that I just played was called Journey of the Sorcerer by the Eagles. Now, I'm going to tell you that the fact it was the Eagles has nothing to do with the fact that it's named after the Philadelphia Eagles. Nothing to do at all, or this tie, and that factor 8, no, it has nothing to do with that. It's just all purely coincidental. Instead, it is a journey, though. We are talking about a journey. And interesting enough, you talk about the kind of like the journey of the sorcerer. And sorcery kind of has this connotation of alchemy, if you will. And there always sense to me anyway, when I pass by that shipyard, as Julie mentioned, you drive past and you see that huge carrier silhouette. There's almost a sense of alchemy. It's almost a sense of sorcery. It's some kind of magic that goes into that, right? That's the whole thing, is really, something like, how do they do that? But it's not really an alchemy. And that's why I found out it's really more like a chemistry. It's a chemistry of everything that goes in there. It's the place, the people, everything like that. And so that's what we want to talk about, is exactly that. And so let's start our journey with the view from Big Blue. And Big Blue is what they call that big crane that stands right up top. It says Newport News Shipbuilding. And I took this picture when they let me go up in the crane. I'll tell you, there is no better view of this region up the top of Big Blue. I mean, look at that. And you can almost sense that sort of like that stretching out to the horizon there. Of all that green, you can almost sense this almost timeless sense of hope. Way back when, this used to be called Point Hope. And you can sense that as you look out to the horizon, even now, even from the sense up there. And where I took this picture from, there's a spot there that you kind of like transition from, you get up these different ladders and you're trying to go out to the thing where there's nothing there. There's no railing or anything. It's almost like you're spacewalking. And that's what it was like, looking across this horizon, out across the peninsula, and seeing this whole view from Big Blue up here. And you get this real sense of like, boy, something big could happen here. And certainly that's, when Collis Huntington first came here, way back when, a century and a half or so ago, this is what he saw too. But he saw this. He looked at the water. And when you look at, again, this is another shot from Big Blue, and we look across, you can see this open expanse. You had this incredible entryway right out into the Atlantic Ocean. And that's what he saw. He saw this potential, all this potential here, that he could build a place where he wanted to export coal. He needed a place to build ships and repair ships, export coal. And he saw this wonderful, beautiful expanse. And so that's where they found it, Newport News Shipbuilding. And when you look at it, you can see where he was thinking. It's like, yeah, I can go way out there and really just get right out to the sea. Whoop, back. And even back then, you could sense that he could sense that if we did that, we could develop incredible ships here. And so this is all taken off of the Gerald R. Ford, which is now the ship that is the first ship of the class, the Ford-class ships, where John F. Kennedy, the book is on the John F. Kennedy, but the Ford was the first of the class. And this was taken just a few weeks ago on his first deployment, going out to sea. And right now you have, on this aircraft carrier, you have EMALs, which is electromagnetics launching his aircraft. You have these wonderful resting gears that they're taking away all the hydraulic systems off this place, what I call Top Gun technology. And so Huntington, way back when, just kind of visioned, this is what we could do. This is what we can make from it. But we really could not envision, I mean, you probably had a little bit of idea. We really could not envision was the workforce. And that's why I really want to get into, the book really gets into, is this workforce. There's something special about the Newport News Shipbuilding workforce, about the shipbuilders here in Newport News. I've been around a lot of shipyards, and there's something special about them. It draws from all around the region, and the first ones that come here were these, a lot of times these kind of like dirt poor farmers that came up and just really knew about hard work, about, the sense of, I'm just going to do a good job for the good job's sake. They weren't in it for the paycheck. I mean, the paycheck was nice compared to someone to make, but they were in it to go out there and do a good day's hard work and go in there and really just, put their all effort into it. It's the kind of workforce that the other places try to put together, and they just haven't been able to. And that's what you have really here in Newport News, just like that. It's just that kind of workforce that really just makes a huge difference in what they have together and what they're doing out there. But this workforce that came together like this, and it built up and it built up as Newport News Shipbuilding grew and grew, and it became this enormous shipbuilding yard and drew thousands and thousands of workers into it. And so it's just like in a sports team or an armed service even. It doesn't work right unless it works well together. And that's what kind of developed here, was this workforce that developed into a family. But that wasn't easy. That wasn't easy at all. And it went on for, we're talking decades where this workforce was disparate. You had different factions fighting among each other for different things and everything like that. And even as you go into the kind of 60s and 70s, when the country itself was going through a very chaotic state, that the shipyard workforce was also just as chaotic. And this is Bill Bowser. And I met Bill about 20 years ago when I was covering the yard for Newport News Shipbuilding. And let me tell you that, as a shipyard reporter here, it's not, shipbuilders don't trust the media that much. Neither does management. So you really have to prove yourself. Now, where I come from, Philly, I cover unions up there. If you want to get to know the union workers up there, you go out to the bars and you play some darts, you drink some beers, and you get on that way. Well, down here it's a little different. Down here is a matter of going to Waffle Houses and going to backyard barbecues and things like that. But that's what it is. You really have to get them to trust you and everything like that. So that's what I did with Bill. Because I had talked to the folks down at the local 8888, and I want to know about how the union started. Now, Bill here, he grew up in Newport News. His father was a shipyard worker. He had come from, though, that legacy of the Carolina dirt farmer. And when Bill was a young man, quite honestly, he was a disciple of Malcolm X. And then that's the way he saw himself. He wanted to go in the yard, and he wanted to basically rally up the black workers there against the oppression of the white masters. That's the way he really looked at it. And it wasn't, though, until he went into the yard. He did go in and start working there, and he realized, quite honestly, that wasn't the case at all. That, quite honestly, they were all the workers there he saw as a family. And it wasn't white skin or black skin. It was, for lack of a better word, blue collar. And so he started basically working within all the groups. And he hooked up with a white worker named Russ Axum, and the two of them started to build together for a union. And I know, and back then especially, union was a dirty word. It really was. It might as well, said communist kind of thing. But they really thought and really believed that a union would help bring together the workforce in such a way that they could go on to even do better things. And in the end, management fought this. I mean, it went up even to the Supreme Court to try to get a union in there. But that's what they did, though. They built this kind of like family. And I'll tell you, when you're building a family of, you get anywhere from 25, even up to 30,000 workers there. It's a city within a city. So imagine, you have a place that big, with that many people. You're going to have just as many disparate views on everything. And so try to get them all basically rowing in the same direction was a really tough thing to do. But Bill had this, like I said, it's kind of like Saul to Paul conversion, if you will. And he just basically the whole idea of Malcolm X and everything went along with that, he threw out the window because he believed in the whole idea of the working man and the working woman. Because at that time, too, it's again in the 60s and 70s, more women were coming in the yard. And they brought the union in, and actually, it did make a difference. It did. Now, Bill, quite honestly, I mean, to do this, as I said, I got to know Bill pretty well. His family, he lost his family for the most part in doing this. He lost, quite honestly, a lot of personal relationships in doing this, but he believed in this. He believed in the idea of the working man, working woman in the South, working here at Newport News Shipbuilding. And he brought that union together. And that took a lot to do. But that kind of workforce doesn't mean anything unless you have the right leaders, right? I mean, you need people to basically bring it all together to make it work just right. And right here, these two folks right here, the one on, your left is Mike Butler, and basically the one on the right is Captain Terry Marzano. One is the mayor of the shipbuilding process field of the John F. Kennedy, and the other is the mayor from the Navy side of the ship. Because at Newport News Shipbuilding, you have a very odd kind of relationship of the Navy and the yard. On one hand, you have this contractor, and this, and customer kind of relationship. But on the other hand, quite honestly, the two are working for the same thing, to build these great ships. And so you have to develop this kind of relationship to get this going, to keep this going in the same direction with this wonderful workforce behind it. So I want to talk about Mike Butler for a second or two. When I first got the okay to do the book, and the management surprisingly said, yeah, we're going to work with you because of the years I've been working as a reporter for a daily press, there were more than a few stories I didn't like. But in the end, they trust me, and they put me in touch with Mike Butler. And Mike, basically, his job was make sure that John F. Kennedy got built on time, got built on budget, and got built up to the standards that the yard wanted it to be done. And just as important, by the way, is the standards that the workers want to be done. Because let me tell you right now, no one is tougher on the standards inside the yard on how these ships are built than the workers themselves. They'll take pride. They'll tell you that, this is a Newport News weld. And Mike Butler is the most unassuming guy. The hardest thing I had with him, quite honestly, is because he didn't want any of the spotlight, any of the limelight. And so I would say, well, what did you do here? Well, yeah, I really didn't do anything. I just relied on so-and-so and do this. But that wasn't the case. Mike just all he wanted to do was make sure that the workers got all of the fame for what they did. He wanted to make sure there was none of this, the limelight, the spotlight, wanted to be nowhere near it. And yet, when you went through the yard with Mike, if you keep up with him, because I'll tell you right now, so, come down here, I used to bring my mountain bike and I would park and then I would ride from place to place while I was doing the research, and then I'd go out to Harwood's Mills and go out and mountain biking trails, and I thought I was in pretty good shape until I tried to keep in touch, and pace with Mike here going through the yard. I mean, this guy could run basically along the dry dock, up and down through the carrier bits they were building, and I'd be huffing and puffing, and he'd say, "You coming?" And along the way, be Mr. Butler, Mr. Butler, because quite honestly, one of Mike's big things was that everyone felt they were part of a team with Mike. And that's one thing I noticed at the yard is from top to bottom, the shipbuilders were there, master shipbuilders. Everything they said, everything they did was acknowledged by the people above them. And there was always a symbiotic thing to go up and down the ladder of what made for good ship construction. Especially true as they were bringing computers and everything like that. Newport News Shipbuilding is one of the few places where they brought all the computers in, all the automation in, and they increased the workforce. And they made it even more efficient as they were increasing the workforce. That says something. That says something about the shipbuilders. Shipbuilders embraced this. They saw what could be done with this. And they would go to Mike all the time and say, "Hey, I got this idea for this." And Mike and management would try out that idea. And that's what, when they put the Kennedy out there, one of the things we noticed, they had to build a Kennedy with about a fifth the manpower. They built the Ford. And they were able to do that despite everything that happened. And I mean, everything with COVID came later on, all the contract shenanigans, all the problems they had before they had to fix, everything like that. They were still able to do that. And that's, again, a tribute to folks like Mike Butler. And then Captain Terry Marzano. And when I heard that I was going to deal with him, I was like, oh, okay, what's this guy going to be like? I mean, here he was, he had been a fighter pilot. He was a captain. And I'll tell you right now that for the Navy, most of the captains I met have one goal in mind, that's to make admiral. And that's going to depend a lot on the program that they're in. And so what's the benefit to him to help someone write about his ship? I mean, really. Especially a ship that's under construction, especially a ship that's going, everyone's looking at because of all the problems that have been with the previous ship. And yet, Terry Marzano couldn't have been more helpful. He made sure, I mean, every day I get email from how my sailors treating you. The plank owner sailors, the sailors, basically the first sailors on that ship. The ones who basically, the yard builds the spine of the ship. Terry Marzano and his plank owner sailors, they are the ones who put the spirit in that ship. They bake it right in. And again, that odd relationship, they're working side by side often with the shipbuilders. They would come to shipbuilders and say, "Hey, can you do it this way?" And shipbuilders said, "Oh, sure, we can do that." And that happened all the time with this. And all along the way, Terry Marzano would just make sure, again, not only that I had access, not only that his sailors were talking to me, but also in making sure that the sailors understood what they were doing aboard that carrier. And part of that was he started this thing called the Camelot University, which teaches sailors about John F. Kennedy. And all around, he put in little reminders of what things that John F. Kennedy has said, things he had done. Although one sailor did point out that John F. Kennedy did have his first command boat shot out from under him. Sailors they will. But he just made sure, again, he was putting that spirit on there. Because one of the things that they're doing with this, his job especially, was to make sure that when this ship goes to sea, it's going to go to sea with the right, the right mindset, the right spirit, the right ethos. That's so important to sailors on a carrier. And it starts with Newport News Shipbuilding when they build that ship the way they do, and then it goes right to the plank owner sailors. So the two of them work in a symbiotic way. And Terry Marzano was making darn sure about. In fact, one of the things he was so incredibly worried about was the seal of the ship. He wanted to make sure the seal of the John F. Kennedy captured everything about that ship and the sailors just right. And he had to run it past the Kennedy family, had to run it past the Navy, which is, again, no easy task. And then over here's what we came up with. And the steel right now, I mean, one of the things, I mean, just a few things to point out. For example, the moon in the background because of Kennedy's "We're going to the moon" speech. But one of the things I want to highlight right there is the serve of courage. Because during the building of John F. Kennedy, courage was something that all of them would have to display, and they did in abundance. Because it was during the building of this that not only did we have cultural chaos in our own country, but also COVID. And if you think building a carrier is tough, I mean, building basically, I mean, think about a carrier for just 1 second. A carrier is the size roughly of the Empire State Building. It's a small city with 2 nuclear power plants, with on deck a place to land aircraft, with a hangar below deck, right? With hospital services. You got 5,000 people living on there. It's basically a floating Navy base. You know, it's a city. And here you have, in Newport News, a city-sized workforce, 30,000 people, give or take, you know, at the highest level, building a city within the city. And then COVID hits. How are you going to build a carrier within COVID? As it was told to me more than once, you can't Zoom a weld. So the wrestlers are home with the little Zoom things. They had to go work. That picture over there is them lining up to get into the yard, to go to work. I wish Jennifer Boykin was here, because one thing that they said to a person that I talked to at that yard was just how she took the reins of that company at that time and made sure not only that the work got done, but the fact that the workers also were protected. I mean, if you go back, you know, and book details some of this, you go back through there, and you have the president of the union, Mr. Spivey, and Jennifer Boykin both send out emails and messages to their people. They were sniping at each other. They were both, like, basically kind of stereo on each other, you know? It was as if they were both getting out the same message. And if you go back, I mean, go back to the strikes they've had. I mean, to even get a union in there, you had something called Bloody Monday, where Bill Bowser, the I showed you before, was taken away on a stretcher. And at that moment, though, when the workers were deemed here essential workers for our nation, they were able to go in there and put their serve of courage. We're celebrating veterans now. In the yard, they call them steel veterans. And these shipbuilders, I have to tell you, they serve our country as much as anyone else in air uniform. When they go into that yard, they're risking their life and limb every day with the work they do. It has to be on a swivel. And when they do that, you know, as again, you get 30,000 people coming in that yard, with all these different views, and they have to leave all that stuff outside. All that stuff has to be left outside the gate. Because when they come in there, they have, so there are 3 or 4 things they have on their minds when they come in there. One is they have to make darn sure, right, they're doing a good job. They really, I mean, it's more than just a paycheck. It has to be for what they do. But 2 is they want to leave their ship alive and in one piece. And the 3rd thing is they want to make sure that their workmate also leaves that ship alive in one piece. And so it's courage. John F. Kennedy used to always talk about Hemingway's description of courage, of grace under pressure. And at this time, when they were building the ship during COVID, and they're building COVID under all these other things too, that they're still doing with a fifth of the manpower. They still had to deal with the fact they were taking workers off the ship to fix problems on board, all that stuff. They still went in there. They still got the job done. Right here, this is on Ford. I want to put this in here because this is what happens when they do everything right. So that's the electronic magnetic launching system. The one that, let's see, folks like Steve Colbert said aren't even working on this ship. I was out in the ship watching this, and I watched the thing with Colbert one night and says, they came and launched an aircraft. Really? I watched the whole afternoon of them doing just this. This is what the folks at Newport News Shipbuilding are putting out to sea right now. This kind of technology. And if you notice, for those who love Top Gun and all that kind of stuff, you had none of that, that smoke coming out, right? All that steam coming out. That's because these things are electromagnetic. So that means that they're more efficient, they're cheaper, they're easier to maintain, they're faster. This ship, they're right now saying this is the biggest and baddest ship at sea. That's what they're saying on Ford, and I'm not going to do. I agree with them. I mean, this thing goes out there, it's doing the job, and it's out there. They trust the ship day in, day out because the shipbuilders have come in there day after day to make sure this job is done right. They're not going in there, oh, I'm done at 3:30, the bell's going to ring, what will I do until then? There's none of that in that shipyard. There can't be. If that happens, they may not leave that ship alive. The workmate may not leave that ship alive. And more importantly, is that the work may have to be done right. When I was a reporter down at the Daily Press, on more than one occasion, I had shipyard workers come to me with stories of things that were not being done right at the yard, on the ship. It wasn't things that were being done to them, it was the work itself. They were putting their jobs in jeopardy to tell me this. Why? Because they told me, I just cannot sleep at night knowing that sailors are going to sea on ships I put together that were not done right. This is the way to look at it. And so, these are called future hope. The picture on this side is the keel of the new USS Enterprise. Okay, this had the keel laying just a few weeks ago. By the way, just a few piers down is the old USS Enterprise. From decades ago. It predates the show Star Trek with the Enterprise in it. This is what they do at Newport News. This is what they do at Newport News. This is exactly what they do. Next to that is Matt. Now, Matt's an electrician there. He's gone through their apprentice school. This guy, when you talk to him, he's as jazzed up as any one of those shipbuilders I talked to, master shipbuilders, the people who've been there 20, 30, 40 years, he's just jazzed up as them about what he's doing. And this is what I see as the hope. This is exactly it. Again, these workers who go in there, leave all their, whatever their beliefs are, leave them outside the gate, they go in there, they do more than a job. They go and build our carriers. The elevator pitch for my book, it was, hey, this is American workers taking American steel and make American ships to guarantee an American way of life. And this is the future. This is the guys doing it. So here we have basically the place that used to be called Point Hope. Yeah, I think right now it's the pinnacle of hope with folks like this. So anyway, you all have questions? Glad to take them. Yeah.
Hi, Mike. This is a great story. I had no idea when I bought this that it would read almost like a work of fiction in that it tells a great story. So what I'd like to know is, what are you going to work on next?
Until you get the contract in hand, you don't. But as mentioned earlier, I spent some time up in the Arctic in March with the Marines out in Norway, and this summer with the Coasties up around our Alaskan Arctic. And basically, we're going to look at how America is reclaiming the Arctic. And at the same time, we have Americans who are disappearing, Native Alaskans because of what's going on in the Arctic. So that's what we're working on right now. But thanks for that. I tried to bring these stories. My wife says it's kind of like presumptuous to say this too, but I feel like I'm a storyteller. That's what I want to do, is bring the stories of these shipbuilders out to the people, because I really felt they need to be told.
Okay, so we have a question from online.
Okay.
What ship or hull type is pictured on the cover of your book?
That's the Kennedy. You mean the book, the current book, right? Yeah, so that is the Kennedy. That's one of the first early super lifts, they call them. Super lift is when they take a whole bunch of like smaller lifts, put them all together, all the equipment, put together as one big super lift, and Big Blue picks that sucker up and puts it right into the dry dock.
Good evening. I served on 8 ships in the U.S. Navy, all good ships. 3 of them were Newport News products, and I would agree with your assessment that they are exceptional. I'm curious what you would attribute this culture of excellence to, and I think of that quote about always good ships as a good starting point, but I wonder if there's other things that jumped out at you that make this culture so strong. Thank you.
I honestly think what makes this culture so strong, part of it is what I talked about earlier of how the Navy, the sailors, and the shipbuilders work together when they're building a carrier. I mean, for other ships, quite honestly, what happens is that the ship gets built and gets turned over to the Navy. They come on and they start doing all their stuff and stuff like that. But especially because they're nuclear powered, you see nuclear power spaces being built first, and then the Navy nuclear power, the nukes come on and start to rev it up and get it going. And because you have the yard shipbuilders and the Navy personnel working hand in hand sometimes, and in the same yard at the same times, there is a sense of brotherhood, sisterhood that really starts to develop. But also, when you talk to the yard people down here, they're patriots. I mean, not all of them. You wouldn't have 30,000 altogether, but most of them are patriots. They really just believe what they are doing is very important to our country and very important for sailors' lives. They honestly I think of my kids out there, is what I hear a lot. I think of my kids out there. I want to make sure if my kid were out there, and they know, by the way, these carriers, their grandkids could be on these ships. So, it's a good mic's going around.
All right, so we have another question from online. How quickly could our country scale up to wartime shipbuilding needs? I worry that far too much construction has been shifted offshore.
Okay. So first of all, we have to define what they mean by wartime needs. My first book, Crashback, was mentioned in one of the first sentences. I was saying Crashback is we are at war with China. We in the West have this idea of war as only when bullets are flying, or missiles are flying, if you're going to talk about ships at sea. When the fact of the matter is that wars is a different kind of thing, especially when Chinese are concerned. Different levers they push some are economic, some are information, some are propaganda, whatever. And China's been acting like they're at war with the U.S. And right now, China's looking to build a fleet, almost a half dozen carriers to put in the West Pacific. And right now, we've got in the West Pacific one that's guaranteed. And any given time, might one other go over there, maybe another. And that's about it. These carriers take forever to build. I mean, not forever, but you first, like a decade from first cut to even get to a launch kind of thing. So for carriers, that's going to take a while. We are building now, for example, we're building frigates now, and they're supposed to go a lot quicker than the carriers, let's put it that way. And so if they get the money they need, and that's the key always, if they get the money they need, they could put the capacity together to do that, at least the material. The problem right now is workforce. As with every other segment of industry in the U.S. right now, shipbuilding is hunting, crying for workers. That is the long pole in the tent is what's keeping folks from really revving up some things, is to get the right workforce out there. So if you got the right workforce out there, they can do this within a few years. But I'd argue that you have to look at the way you define war, because the other kind of war where missiles are flying, well, that's a totally different ball game where I'm not sure how far ships would go when both sides are basically nuclear armed.
Any more, Tim? Yeah, no, one more. Okay.
people in the back and stuff.
All right, so another question from online. So in some of the pictures, the propellers appear to be fabricated in pieces. Can you describe how those propellers were different from earlier ones?
Can I describe how we're different from earlier ones? No. I'll be perfectly honest. So, you know, I wish my butler was here. He could describe that. I mean, I am, you know, that is, you know, for these carriers especially, for these different carriers to go through, there's going to be different ones that are going to be not outsourced, but have different vendors that go in through the years and stuff like that because of how long it takes to build them. But I really don't know how they, for example, different from those on the Ford, and especially different from those on the Nimitz, which are a generation ago. Sorry.
Go ahead, sir.
Sir.
Thanks for being here, Michael. Two-part question. Number one, has the company or the Navy invited you to go on initial sea trials on Kennedy? And second part is, if the answer is yes, can I go with you?
So sea trials for Kennedy are a while off. I mean, I'll have to say that both the Yard and the Navy were incredibly accessible when I was doing the book. I mean, in terms of granted interviews and everything like that. The one thing I really, really wanted to do, and we couldn't make happen, is when they did these shock trials, as they call them, for the Ford. And that's basically when you put the carrier out to sea and you blow up major bombs under sea next to the carrier and see how the things shake apart. I really tried to go on the ship for that, and it went pretty high, and then the end was turned down. You know, so for sea trials, it's harder to get on ships because, quite honestly, if something goes wrong, they don't want someone there who could report on it. I mean, that's really a lot of what that is. And to their credit, there's also a safety factor. You know, when you're on sea trials, you know, the ship's not in a rough state, but they're putting it through its paces. Something could go wrong, and if you're not a contractor or a sailor who knows what they're doing, you could be in harm's way in a hurry. But if I do get invited, give me your card. I'll make sure that you go on.
When I was at Webb Institute, the former chief of the Bureau of Ships, Admiral William A. Brockett, they finished the Enterprise, and we were about ready to start working on the Nimitz. He told me personally, he said, Newport News is the world's largest country store. And my experience in 40 years is that he was absolutely correct.
So is that a compliment, or?
Here's another.
So my question, I'm curious as far as the workforce, you talked about getting, recruiting new people to work in the workforce, but what about folks that retire from the military? Was there a lot of those type of folks that retire from the Navy or the Coast Guard and then work for the shipyard?
There's more than a few. They have special programs for that. So absolutely, that's been going on and back and forth through the years at all the shipyards, to be honest. I mean, that's something that they really try to encourage. It's just a tough time right now.
Yeah, your talk this evening was about a lot of the shipyard workers, but we also have several thousand engineers.
Yes.
Is the esprit de corps there as well and good as in the yard?
The quick answer is yes, but what I find more interesting is the dynamic between the engineers and the shipbuilders. Because especially as peers come on board, because you know, and one time I'll have the engineer saying, well, you know, I gave them the specs and then they just screwed it up, and you know, one shipbuilder says, I told them it wouldn't work like that. I know what they have here in the computer, but it's just not going to work that way. You know, and so there's a definitely kind of, you know, friction going there, but also there's no doubt that the engineers at the yard are just top notch. I mean, some of the things that they come out with, some of the ways they've done workarounds, because a lot of these new technologies that go into carriers, you know, quite honestly, are not Newport News Shipbuilding products, so to speak. They're systems that, you know, that are provided from another vendor through the Navy, and then the yard has to go and make it work. I mean, the electromagnetic launching systems, they have to be laser fitted on the ships. You know, basically the laser makes sure that it lines them all up, and they have to do that at night, because during the day, the ship will move with the sun. I mean, contracts and expands and everything. So it's, you know, the engineers are figuring it all out. And right now, the engineers are really, it seems like they're having a blast with the way they're using computers in shipbuilding, not just in designing the ship, but the engineers are playing a great big role in how the ships are being put together and getting a lot of work done earlier, which is done cheaper and more efficient and actually more accurate, stuff like that. It's really interesting. Thanks. Thank all of you.